Diddy may have been acquitted of some pretty big charges at his criminal trial, but he still was convicted of 2. So what's next for him in terms of sentencing, his finances, facing a wave of lawsuits, including a brand new one from a former exotic dancer who claims Diddy drugged and assaulted him, caused him to lose teeth and have to get gastric surgery?
Diddy completely broke down in court today, and honestly, it was one of the most surreal, jaw-dropping moments anyone could have expected. This wasn't some minor outburst. It was a full-blown emotional collapse right there in front of everyone.
Well, after the monumental verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial, the question now is, what is next for him, right? You got sentencing, civil suits, a lot to get into. So while Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges that he was facing, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. Right, they don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event, so he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If the case was, if they had called, let's say, Christina Korum, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying.
A man who once reigned over the music world, surrounded by millions, basking in fame, power, and an almost untouchable status, now stood in a courtroom stripped bare, vulnerable, and completely undone by what had just happened. It all started with the judge's voice, cold, steady, and unshakable. No theatrics, no sympathy, just sharp, unflinching words. The room fell into silence. There were no cameras allowed, but the news spread fast, and by all accounts, it felt like watching an empire collapse in real time. The judge read the verdict, announced the sentence, and the moment it hit, Diddy broke down. You could see the change in his body. The man once celebrated for his composure and command was now gripping the edge of the defendant's table, like it was the only thing holding him together. Witnesses say he yelled something. No one could quite make out the words. Some say he tried to stand, maybe to protest, to plead, to speak, but whatever it was, it didn't matter.
Read messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. You know, Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not. But if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in Amia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, you know, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, but do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem, I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific. All of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't do it now. It was time barred.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything.
Yep.
But that would have been, he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense to a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that, and the defense argument, which they obviously argued very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started, and and the jury, this was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct, and they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning, saying, "Hey, this guy's not deliberating," and so this was a serious group, and the Mann Act, they did convict on that, so they were. By the fact that that it was unanimous meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have. They draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duty, is from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote, and you tend to get a more serious class of juror in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for years.
Sure.
But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just like the sex trafficking, sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under circumstances that equate to rape. Is something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here, especially when you're talking about all these people who they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when when the defense attorney got up and said, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? And that was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and be like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? What's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, the trauma. I get it. I totally understand it, but I wonder if that's what saddled the jury. Okay, I want to move past the verdict because now we have to talk about what's happening next.
He had to be pulled back down by his own lawyers more than once. The desperation in that courtroom was heavy, almost suffocating. People there said they'd never seen anything like it, especially not from someone of Diddy's status. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't staged drama. It was pure, raw emotion, the kind that erupts when a person finally understands it's over, that the consequences he'd managed to outrun for so long had finally caught up to him. But let's rewind a bit, because this didn't come out of nowhere. That sentence, that cold, unforgiving verdict, wasn't some sudden twist. It came after weeks, even months of shocking testimonies, explosive witness statements, damning evidence, and a case that tore apart the polished image Diddy had maintained for years. It revealed a version of him the public either never saw or chose not to believe. This trial wasn't about one mistake. It was about years, some say decades, of alleged abuse, manipulation, control, and calculated cover-ups. The court heard from former employees, past partners, artists, and insiders, people who had remained silent for years, whether out of fear, loyalty, or legally binding NDAs. But once that silence cracked, the truth flooded out like a tidal wave. Testimony after testimony, some filled with tears, others delivered with chilling calm, all pointed to the same disturbing pattern. And what made those voices even more powerful was this: they weren't seeking fame. These weren't anonymous posts or whispers from gossip blogs.
Because I believe, if I was Diddy's attorney and given the way the evidence came in, I'd certainly be like, look, these things happen during dark times where I was in a drug, induced haze to where I was doing and acting in ways that I am ashamed about now. But during that time, it was because drug, sex addiction, and things like that I'm now addressing.
Well, you actually kind of sound like Diddy's defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, because he literally made essentially the exact same argument, especially during the bond hearing. But I'm curious to know, obviously there are skeptics of this where they think it's strictly just to look good, it's just for good press, all of that stuff. Yeah. But in your opinion, do you think that these courses are just too little too late? I mean, the defense was saying that he was trying to get help before, he was trying to get help to address his drug use previously, that Jane was helping him get into a batterers program. But do you think it's too little too late?
Well, it's too little too late for his victims, okay? But it's not too little too late for the rest of the people he's gonna encounter while he continues to live out the rest of his life. And so you can't slam the door on redemption. You can't slam the door on someone trying to address destructive behavior. So I think, he does get some kudos for enrolling in the program and for the efforts he made prior to finding himself in federal court facing all of those charges. So I think it does go to his credit, but you're right. Critics and skeptics, sometimes they'll just never be satisfied. And for, well-founded reasons. When you have someone who has a documented history such as him and you see the videos and you hear the testimony, his problem goes deeper than a 30-day, program. Not that these programs are 30 days, but just to say it's going to take long-term and commitment to the long-term results in order for us to really have confidence that he's not going to engage in such disturbing behavior.
And it's interesting too, because I think the public reaction to this verdict was really kind of split down the middle. I was really thinking it was going to be one way. I was at the courthouse. It was a completely different kind of beast and animal that was going on after the verdict happened. There were people with the baby oil. It was a crazy day after the verdict happened. But I know some analysts were kind of comparing it to the O.J. Simpson verdict, but it seemed like the reaction was really kind of split down the middle. A lot of people upset with the jury's decision, but then there were a lot surprisingly celebrating the verdict. What are your thoughts?
Well, my entire time looking at the case, the charges, and listening, to the evidence as it came in during trial, I thought that depending upon how a person, be it a juror, be it the public, comes into the trial believing how someone who's a victim should act and how they believe relationships can evolve or devolve and fall apart is the lens that they would then make their verdict. Why I say that is because if you think a person who's battered, someone who's been a victim, someone who's been assaulted in the ways that were described, most people have an idea as to how they will respond and act towards that, or their expectation if it happened to their loved one, how they'd expect their loved one to act. And in those situations, you don't expect someone to be tweeting, you don't expect somebody to be sending texts telling their abuser that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down.
They risked everything to speak out. You could see it in their eyes. These were stories that had been buried for far too long. And finally, the courtroom gave them the space to let it all out. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid everything out in detail: timeline, motives, patterns, behaviors. They didn't try to paint Diddy as a misunderstood artist. They portrayed him as a man who allegedly used his power, fame, and fear as weapons. They argued that his empire wasn't built solely on talent, but on control, intimidation, and enforced silence. And that's what hit the jury the hardest. That's what stuck with them. Now, let's talk about the sentence. Because while people expected something serious, what they got was severe. This wasn't a slap on the wrist or a symbolic move to make headlines. This was real, a sentence with weight, real consequences. We're talking years, not a few months, not community service, not house arrest in a mansion, actual prison time. The kind that breaks celebrities, the kind that strips away everything, the image, the lifestyle, the identity, and Diddy felt every ounce of it. It showed in his face. Disbelief gave way to rage. Rage turned into desperation. And then silence. A chilling, heavy silence. He didn't just lose a court case that day. He lost the persona he spent decades building. The brand, the name, Diddy. Once a symbol of swagger, dominance, and success, now forever tied to scandal and collapse. And let's be honest, we've all heard the whispers over the years. Industry talk, behind-the-scenes murmurs, former associates hinting in interviews or off the record. But no one ever imagined it would end like this.
For 9 months, almost 10 months. Yeah. And what has his experience been like at the MDC?
He's been a model prisoner. He's not causing any trouble. He's not getting, and as you can see, that he's not been getting rid of. He has not been causing any type of uncomfort for the rest of the inmates. He's just been in there, just doing his time and focusing on getting out.
What did you make of the allegations from prosecutors before the trial that he was improperly using, phone record, the phones and communication services to reach out to people? What'd you make of that?
They were trying everything they possibly can to paint him as a mobster, gangster type of individual. Like, he's using the phone, he's doing this. He's reaching out to his kids, asking kids how they doing. He's never been separated from his children. He got 7 kids, and 4 of whom mother is done passed on. God bless her. And he's the only parent that them children had. And to be separated from them, he had to check. He was trying to just call and check on his kids. They try to make everything. They just, you never heard the saying, "Don't make a federal case out of it." That's what happened.
Yeah, I think I've used that phrase. They
make a federal case out of everything.
Has he told you? Let's say he gets time served, okay, and let's say he gets released in October, maybe sometime sooner. Has he indicated what he wants to do with his life moving forward?
He's going to. Sean's a very, very smart guy, and I'm saying he'll become a billionaire and the creator of all these businesses. Not being a smart person, he's already formatted in his brain what he's doing when he get out, and that's for the world to see. But all I can say is to be continued. But I know the first thing he's going to do is go see his mom, kiss all over her, love all over her. Same thing with his children. She's going to cook him the best meal he ever had. And he just want to be loved around his family. That's what he just missed all that. He missed birthdays, he missed Christmases, he missed Thanksgivings, he missed all that graduations, he missed all the important factors in his children's life.
You think there's a concern that the public looks at him differently after everything that came out at the trial or in the civil suits?
No, because that's his personal life. That's his personal. I don't, for somebody to pay attention to what's going on in your bedroom, to me is insane. You can't. I don't care what you do in your bedroom.
Do you think people are going to look at him differently after the Cassie tape, 2016 tape?
What they're gonna look at, they seen a dark Sean. That was a drug-induced toxic Sean. That wasn't a Sean or the Puff or the Diddy that they know and I know, right? So they understand that this is the reason why you don't let your brother drive home drunk, because he's impaired. There's a reason why you wouldn't let a person that's on drugs babysit your child, because they're impaired. They're not gonna make the right decisions. And there's a reason why some people are like, yo, don't bring Bobby to the party, he's been drinking. Bobby's normally a nice guy, but if he has a couple of drinks, Bobby might act up. So being a drug-induced Sean Combs is a totally different person from a normal, clean Sean Combs who's been in jail for 10 months and that's clean. So
in other words, you think his lifestyle is going to be different when he's released?
I think the drug-induced part of it will be different. There's rehab, because we're definitely doing that with him to make sure he stays clean. We're definitely doing some counseling as far as anger management, so we know where he went wrong and how to channel certain things.
No one expected it to explode like this. No one saw it unraveling so publicly, so dramatically, and with such a crushing finality. What's even more startling is how many people helped keep it hidden. NDAs, hush money, slick PR moves, and loyalty secured through favors and wealth. It's a familiar playbook in celebrity circles. But this case proved one thing: the truth always finds a way. And when it does, no amount of power or money can stop it. Now, social media is in flames. Some fans are still clinging to denial, rushing to defend him. Others are deleting his music, distancing themselves fast. Former collaborators are being dragged into the chaos, pressed for statements, pushed to explain. It's a storm, a cultural reckoning unfolding right in front of us. The music industry, already bruised by scandal, just took another brutal blow. So, what happens next? Diddy's legal team says they're planning an appeal. Of course they are. It's what lawyers do. But the way this case unfolded, the judge slicing through every delay tactic, every distraction, every excuse, made one thing clear-cut: the system is taking this seriously. An appeal won't erase what's already on the record. And in this case, the facts were ironclad. Let's not forget, this wasn't built on rumors. The court had everything: video clips, audio recordings, text messages, financial trails, flight logs, even surveillance footage. This wasn't speculation. It was hard evidence. And that's why the verdict hit like it did: heavy, irreversible, final. Some are calling it the most dramatic downfall in modern hip-hop history, bigger than R. Kelly, bigger than Tory Lanez. Because Diddy wasn't just another artist, he was a mogul, a power player, a cultural architect. His reach extended into music, fashion, television, liquor empires, even politics. He didn't just ride the wave, he helped shape it. And now he stands as a chilling reminder of its darkest truths.
IG, the rapper who was shot and killed in 1997, Sean Combs' friend, and people start taking drugs, they start wandering around this warehouse, and this John Doe claims that Combs started watching pornography on his phone, and that is when he claims, again, warning, pretty disgusting allegation, that Combs grabbed one of Biggie's t-shirts and pleasured himself with it, into it. I don't know how the best way to explain it. And even alleging that John Doe, or insisting that John Doe finish the job, so to speak. And he then claimed Combs threw the spoiled shirt onto John Doe and said, "Rip Biggie," then left. He also claimed that 15 years earlier, Combs told him to perform oral sex on him, reportedly suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual battery. Don't have a ton of information, but for somebody who has been following so many of the civil lawsuits that he now faces, 66, 67, 68, How does this fit into all of them?
Well, it seems like it's just kind of showing a pattern that all the lawsuits seem to kind of allege of power, control, sexual pleasure, all of that stuff. I would say the timing of it is a little surprising given that it came after the verdict a little bit, but I think it kind of, again, goes to that pattern that a lot of the other civil suits we've seen, and these can be by just different attorneys too. It's not always the same attorney who's filing these suits, but it seems like they all kind of go to this pattern, it seems. But again, I'm just more surprised at the timing of it and when this was filed too.
To be clear, there are lawsuits that he's facing that contain allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things, or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women and that being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot.
The reaction inside the courtroom was utter disbelief. Reporters say even court staff looked visibly shaken. Some jurors had tears in their eyes. One reportedly said afterward, "I grew up on his music. I never imagined I'd be part of the group that helped put him away." That's the weight of what happened. This wasn't just a legal verdict, it hit people on a personal level. And honestly, it's going to take time for everything to sink in. The fallout is far from over. More investigations are expected. Civil lawsuits are coming. New voices may step forward. Record labels are scrambling to sever ties. Brands are pulling endorsements. It's a chain reaction, and it's only just beginning. Because when one giant falls, everyone in their orbit comes under the microscope. And at the center of it all is Diddy. A man who once had everything, now stripped of it all, in an instant. Not because of bad luck, but because of choices, alleged actions, and a lifestyle driven by power, indulgence, and control. Now, all of it is gone. What's left is a prison sentence and a legacy in ruins. Whether you admired him, criticized him, or never really paid attention, this moment lands heavy. It marks a cultural shift, one that people won't stop talking about anytime soon. Diddy didn't just lose a trial today. He lost the illusion, the myth, the untouchable image he spent decades creating. And when he was finally led out of that courtroom, eyes red, silent, surrounded by guards, there was no music, no cheering, no entourage. Just a man walking straight into the consequences he never thought he'd face. And that right there was the true end of the Diddy era.